I'd read somewhere that being a geologist actually has one of the most satisfying outlooks for anybody who becomes one. Upwards of 90% of people who are a geologist stay a geologist.
The Job Guppy podcast is on a mission to help career explorers and job seekers find out from real people what a specific career or job is really like on a day-to-day basis. Join me, your host, Chris Hodges, as we dive in and explore jobs with each guest. You'll hear from experienced working professionals with transparent, realistic, and job-specific insight about the daily roles and their career journey. We go on to explore other topics like job search recommendations and income and salaries. You'll hear answers to questions like, do I need to go to college for this job? How much college? What is your work-life balance like? What do you like or dislike, or what would you do different? And if you don't like what you hear about one job role, we discuss alternative job titles to explore related to the same industry. And my favorite part is the end, where the guest shares their inspirational insight and recommendations for the next person wanting to get started on their career journey. Today we are speaking with Adam Damman. Adam has a bachelor's and master's degree in geology from Baylor University. He is a senior geologist with 10 years oil and gas industry experience and 3 years of environmental industry experience. His current role is an operations geologist in the petroleum industry. In this role, he works directly with the oil rig real time to make sure they are staying on course while drilling in the rock. It's also referred to as geosteering. Adam is also what is known as a carbonate geologist specialist. Think of geology as it relates to oceanography. It turns out limestone is ancient coral reef structures. His academic thesis work was on comparing modern reefs in Bermuda with ancient reefs in Texas. This additional area of expertise helps set Adam apart from other geologists in the petroleum industry. As for perks of this role, listen closely to hear how some operations geologists can get up to 20 weeks of vacation a year. Hi, Adam.
Hello.
Is there anything credential-wise you would like to share before we kind of get into the job description itself with your credentials?
I guess I would just say that I have a master's in geology from Baylor University. I think having a college degree is really going to be the best way to get into the geological fields for sure. And I have kind of split time between the petroleum industry and actually a whole nother side of geology, environmental geology. I've got 8 years in I guess probably 9 years now actually in the petroleum industry as a senior geologist, and then I have 3 years on the environmental side.
All right. Well, we talked a little bit ahead of time, and you'd mentioned geologist is a pretty generic term. You'll see that a lot. So I did look up geologists and did see there are many types of geologists. And then I looked up geologists in the petroleum industry specifically and really just found a few sentences here and there. I actually got the following from the Bureau of Labor Statistics.gov that petroleum geologist is a type of geoscientist and search for oil and gas deposits that are suitable for commercial extraction. So that being said, if somebody's looking at this stuff and that's kind of the only information they're getting off the internet when they try to research what a geologist in the petroleum industry does, like what I would like to do today is see how these descriptions play out on a daily basis in your job specifically. So viewers and listeners can walk away and feel like they know what a petroleum geologist does on a daily basis. So I'll kind of let you take it from here. And if you want to break your role down, your day, your week, if you've got cyclical work.
All right. Yeah. So the definition that you provided there, it's part of the job description. So in the petroleum industry, there are I kind of call them rotational positions because a lot of companies will rotate you through different geologist positions within that industry, and one of them would be what they call an operations geologist. An operations guy is somebody who helps, basically they call it geosteering wells. So you're drilling an oil and gas well, and nowadays most oil and gas wells are horizontal wells, so it comes down and just kind of makes the L shape, and you're working directly with the rig real time to make sure that they're staying in the rock that you need them to be in. And then there's another role, the development geologist role, which is you're kind of trying to figure out how to best optimize the field that you're in. So you're dealing with different well spacings, different well targets, where you actually want to put the wells, how to address different land issues to make sure you have all of your drillable land together. So there's a lot that goes into that. You probably wear more hats in the development geo role than any role. And then another one would be a regional geologist role, which is somebody who really zooms out and takes a big picture look at a huge area to try to figure out where those extractable resources are, which is where that bureau definition comes in. So that description you provided is probably more of a regional geologist role, trying to figure out the best way to extract.
And those are still related to petroleum industry, though?
Yep, those are all in the petroleum
Okay.
industry. So those are really keywords that you'd want to search for when you're looking for a geologist role in petroleum. And they actually usually have them listed on LinkedIn or company websites as those exact words. They'll have operations geologists, they'll have development geologists, they'll have regional geologist. So there are multiple subdisciplines within geology and petroleum industry. Yeah.
So which one do you fit into one of those specifically?
So because I've been in it probably for 9 years now, I would say I've kind of completed that rotation. So I feel like I've got a pretty good foundation in kind of all three of those. In my current role, I'm probably more of an operations geologist, working with the rigs and the drillers. I have significant experience in the development geologist role and probably a little less on the regional side, but I do have experience there as well.
So that's actually pretty good. It's almost like two interviews in one without taking twice as long. Which one would you, I guess, if you could, you contrasted them earlier with describing what each kind of how you would categorize each one. Do you find that they, I guess, if you were to break your daily work down, are they extremely different from each other? Like you talk about time in the office or time in meetings, time on your own, traveling. Like, I guess in your operational role, like we can just kind of talk about that one since that's where you are more in right now. What's a day like? You got up this week. How was your Monday, Tuesday? Like what were you really doing those days as far as meetings, working online, outside, paperwork?
The operational role is generally pretty company specific with how they've got that outlined and what your schedule looks like. It's probably sound kind of scary to viewers, but you're on the clock 24/7. So you've got a pretty funky schedule sometimes.
No,
Sometimes
that's good. That's the kind of info I'm looking to get out is like, what is that? Something that I bring up later, and that kind of plays into this, what you said, the work-life balance. What is that like 9 to 5? Is it, like you said, 24/7? But that's exactly the kind of info I'm looking to pull out of these interviews and, enlighten or share with people.
yeah, the work-life balance depends on how many wells you've got going at one time.
Yeah.
I've steered as many as 7, which will knock you on your tail pretty quick.
Mm-hmm.
But generally, it's probably 1 to 3, I would assume, and you're getting data in from the field. Well, this is where it becomes company specific. So the company I used to work for, it used to just be one operations geologist on that rig, and then you kind of put out what we call like updates as needed to the rig so that they know what they need to do. And if you feel like they don't need one, you can just kind of go to bed and your work life balance stays pretty reasonable. But the newer method for a lot of these companies, my old one has actually shifted to this. And then I work with a subcontracting company at the moment who also has the same thing. It's 12 hours on, 12 hours off. So they work, for example, 4 a.m. to 4 p.m. or 4 p.m. to 4 a.m., but it's 2 weeks on and then you have 2 weeks off to kind of recover from that kind of grueling gauntlet.
Yeah, I was going to ask what the pros and cons were of a 24/7 kind of on call. There has to be some give and take there, but that's one of them is, I guess that's how they balance it out. These just very on and then very off kind
Yep.
of
Yeah,
lifestyle,
it's
I
exactly
guess.
what it is. And if you do it the right way, I mean, those 2 weeks off, I mean, you're basically getting like 20 weeks of vacation a year for
Yeah.
putting in those 2 weeks. So most of my friends in the operational side of things are traveling all over the place during those 2 weeks and having a lot of fun. So it is a really neat job, and I really enjoy that job because you kind of have a direct impact on the bottom line, the success of every well that you drill, which could be $6 to $10 million, and it's kind of all riding on you, which is very scary for a while until you kind of get used to the feel.
So do
But
you take on some solo responsibility like that, or is it more of a team based? You get to share the pain or the gain if it goes up or down.
it kind of depends. If you give them the wrong update or you've got them in the wrong spot and the well goes off the rails, then it's unfortunately kind of on you. But if there are actual drilling issues out there, then that falls more on the drilling side of things. So you're kind of covered on that front.
It sounds like you're spending a lot of time in the office, I guess. You're not like out, getting your boots dusty, so to speak, like every day having to do this. You're able to coordinate and get information and communicate online, remotely, and manage things from a distance.
Yeah, that's generally true. Most companies now seem to want you to be in office for your shifts. And I think part of the reason for that is you've got other people in the office with you to kind of act as backups, saying, hey, this doesn't look right or something might be going wrong here. What's your opinion on it? And it's kind of important to have that collaboration. The company I'm with right now, which is a small company out of Austin, and I live in Salt Lake City for those that don't
Mhm.
know, they let me do it remotely. Since I'm the only operations geologist here, I'm able to stay at home. But
What I meant more by remote was you don't have to be out where they're doing the drilling necessarily. When I
usually
say
not, no.
okay, yeah, that's it's more what I meant more inside versus outside. How you're interacting with people, it sounds a lot like it's electronic communication,
Yeah.
things like that.
Yeah, they got some pretty nifty setups to send information directly from the rigs right to you at your home office or your work office.
So if somebody wanted to be in the field, could they be in the operational role and go out and be on site? If that's just, some people just want that outdoor, or certain stages like to be there. Or is it really, it's not conducive for that. And it's like, if that's what you want, you might want to consider one of the other roles that kind of lean that way more often than your operational type role.
So there are, I guess, two comments to that. One of the things that I actually dislike about my job in general, whether it's operational or development or regional, is there aren't many opportunities for outside time, regardless of the role. It's more of an office-based job than I had initially planned on it being. I thought it would be kind of a travel the world kind of thing and go to these cool places and try to discover oil and stuff. And unfortunately, it
Yeah.
doesn't really
And that's
really
kind of
work
why I'm
that way.
asking. That was some of my assumption too. And that's what I'm trying to find out is it like I think it is? You just hear petroleum industry drilling wells, and you just assume everybody's out at the site, outdoors, wherever the sites are. So okay. So that's good to know. That's actually, like you said, later on there's some things about what were surprises or things like that. That we might come back and touch on that later.
There is, I guess, the second point to that. If you wanted to be on site, there is a geologist position called a mud logger who basically looks at all of the material coming out of the well that's being drilled and kind of catalogs that material. That is a possibility. Well, I wouldn't recommend that position to anybody outside of just trying to get started. Basically, it could be a good entry level position, but the hours and the pay associated with that role are not very strong. If you could avoid it, I would, but some people love
Yeah.
it. Some people just
Yeah.
love being out there on the rig and seeing what's coming out of the ground, and more power to them for it.
That's an option if they're, it's where their priorities are, what they want out of the job. And, people just have to kind of weigh their situation. So it's just good to have the information to help make those decisions. So do you spend a lot of time in meetings, or are you just going through data and putting plans together, and then you get on the meetings every now and then or send your update out?
Generally, there are a pretty fair amount of meetings.
Okay.
For most companies, you have a drilling plan established before they even start drilling the well, and you need to get approval on those plans, or you might need to help create those plans and work with the drilling engineers to make sure everything is in order before you start drilling that well. So that can require a fair bit of meetings. And then the process of even starting getting a well started or ready to drill, I should say, can take months. It could take, I don't know, three to 9 months per well. So a lot of that stuff is happening well beforehand, and there's multiple meetings with management typically to get the sign off on those.
Is your stage just kind of at the, I guess, late beginning stages where they've got a plan in place and you're helping to implement it? And then once the well is up and running, then you kind of move on to the next well, and somebody else takes over kind of maintaining daily operations of the well at that point, once it's kind of just on cruise control, if it ever goes on cruise control.
Sometimes it's on cruise control if you're lucky. So usually wells are drilled on what we call pads. So, and a pad is just a group of wells. So there could be anywhere from one well to, I don't know, maybe even 8 wells on one pad, one group, and you kind of try to address all of those at the same time so that you can just kind of knock them all out at the same time. And then when it comes time to drill, then it's kind of at the mercy of whoever is going to be helping with the operational side of that role of that process. Yeah.
After they drilled it and they successfully tap whatever they're drilling for, do you disengage from the project at that point and move to the next pad? Or it's your company, we just work with this pad and we'll always be working with these pads. And, like that's just a continual 2 or 3 years later, you're still running operations for the pads you were 3 years ago, or does it move?
No, so once we're done drilling the pad on the operational side, you kind of move on to the next pad because the rig moves pretty quick. And then the data that you're getting from the production of those wells is where the other two roles come in, the development geologist role and the regional geoscience role, especially the development side because you're trying to maximize that production. So you're looking at all the possible data to get the best well possible every time. And then obviously from a regional standpoint, you want to look at that production to see what you think you can get from a larger area to see if it's something that you want to continue to drill or not. From the meeting standpoint, I would say that there are many more meetings on the development side than there are the operational side because there's a lot of money going into each of those pads. If you have 8 wells on a pad, it's probably $200 million decision for each pad. So there's a lot riding on that and a lot of X's and O's you need to get checked off before you can proceed to the drilling phase of those or the next pad.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, that's really great that you've got some insight into the other roles, because that's actually helpful to have that information. And just kind of looking at the questions here, I think you touched on a lot of what you do. Is there anything, that you think would surprise people to know about your job, or anything unique that sets you apart in your role, compared to what people might think is the norm?
I guess the surprising thing is kind of something we alluded to earlier, which generally there's not a lot of travel involved. Maybe if you work for a really large company, maybe somebody like an Exxon or Shell or somebody, and they have worldwide assets, you might get a little bit more travel. But a lot of the drilling now is focused in West Texas. So I've been pretty much nowhere but Texas my entire
Yeah.
career, other than some neat training trips. The other thing that people should consider is that the oil industry, and I think most people realize this, is it's very unstable. So when the oil commodity is high and the economy is going good, I mean, you kind of ride the golden wave because things are great for you when you're in it. But when things crash, layoffs are extremely common. And the people that I've spoken to that have been in the industry for even 40 or 50 years, they said if you get there, there's almost no way you're going to get through this industry without being laid off at least once or twice. And that even happened to me a couple of years ago when the economy crashed. I ended up getting laid off and had a little bit of a career shift there for a while just to make ends meet because when things are laid off or when things are low, when people get laid off, it's extremely competitive to try to get back into that unless you've got a really good connection. So I would say to the viewer, definitely beware and have that on your radar that is a real possibility that's going to happen at some point, unfortunately.
That's a big factor. Somebody looking to get into this is looking for job stability. That might play into their decision making. Somebody with a kind of family already there, single income household, or versus a individual, or yeah, that's all really good information. And you're right. You hear about it in the news, the gas prices going up and down, but you never really think about the trickle down economics of where it's actually hitting all the workers and or to what scale. Like, oh yeah, there's layoffs, but the way you put it is it's a large scale factor in either direction. And so just people
Yep.
need to be aware of that going into that industry. Thanks for bringing that
Yep.
up. That's a very
Yep.
good point. You mentioned some of your likes and dislikes about the job role. I don't know if you want to share anything more specifically about that and the work-life balance before we move on to anything else like certifications or ongoing education or your path. Anything else you want to add to that?
The side I like the most, and I think I might have mentioned this earlier, is really just having such a direct impact on the operations, the day-to-day operations of the company. It's very rewarding, I guess, when your vision and your work is taken to make very expensive decisions, I suppose. And it's even better when it turns out to be right. Not so
Yeah.
great when it's wrong, but it's not always going to be perfect. And they realize that the typical saying in the industry is 70% answer is usually good enough because you're not going to be able to get the other 30%.
Okay.
I think a lot of the training classes I've been to, I've really enjoyed. I really like working from a scientific perspective, which is why I'm technically a scientist, I suppose. You get to learn a lot of different subdisciplines across geology, which when I was deciding to become a geologist, that's kind of why I became that, is because it incorporates so many different aspects of nature that I'm super interested in. Oceanography is actually a big part of it, which is one of my favorite things. Paleontology is a big part of it. And then geology itself, obviously, is a pretty big part of it. So incorporating all those things together has been really fun to work in. And I think I had read somewhere that being a geologist actually has one of the most satisfying outlooks for anybody who becomes one. Upwards of 90% of people who are a geologist stay a geologist. That's how much people like it.
Wow. Wow. It's a
That's
pretty
pretty neat.
unique fact. Yeah. Significant at the same time.
Yep. Very.
Yeah. With you specifically, is there anything unique or something that sets you apart in your role compared to the norm?
As far as things that set me apart, I kind of just spoke about this with geology pertaining to oceanography. So I would be what I would consider a carbonate geologist specialist, and carbonate meaning limestone. And I know people in Texas are like limestone, like who cares?
Yeah.
But it's actually really cool when you start understanding where that stuff comes from. That limestone, it's basically ancient reefs, ancient coral reefs, or different reef structures that other organisms created way back in the day. So I have a pretty deep understanding on that. I focused on that in college, and I actually did my thesis on a modern reefs in Bermuda versus ancient reefs in Texas, and kind of comparing those two. And understanding that limestone system in some ways can be super helpful in the petroleum and gas industry because most people focus on shales and sands and that kind of stuff. Not as many people have that limestone background.
I find I learn something new in each of these interviews. That will be one of them. The whole limestone tie-in, the ancient history and the reefs. Never
Yeah,
would
it's
have thought of limestone having in a prehistoric way connection before.
no, it's just in your way when you're trying to dig a hole. That's all it is in
Yep.
Texas. It seems like.
I have a jackhammer in my garage, just a plant in my backyard. I have to break out a jackhammer.
Yeah, it's brutal.
So, so do you have to, I guess, ongoing education, and then I'll move on outside of maybe some of the stuff, but do you have to maintain any certifications or continual required training that you just, somebody knowing in knows you're never going to finish learning in this role as a certification type basis versus just on the job learning?
No, so there's a big difference here between petroleum geologist and then if you're an environmental geologist or even an academic kind of geologist that works for the state or federal government. So in the petroleum industry, you are not required, and most people actually don't even have a professional geologist license. That's not needed. As far as training is concerned, most companies are really good about providing you ongoing training, but it's not for certification purposes. It's just to make sure you're staying on the cutting edge of all the new technology and developments that are happening in the industry. Because you need to stay on top of your competitors as much as possible, and you need to have the best rounded geologist you possibly can. But in environmental side and state and federal side, you do need to have a professional geologist license to be able to sign off on different reports and site investigations. And there are two different tests you'd have to pass for that. There's a fundamentals of geology test, which I would recommend taking pretty much right when you graduate college, so everything's fresh on your mind. And then there's a professional geology test, which requires you to have a certain amount of work experience. I don't remember the exact amount you need, but that's one that's going to take a little bit more time to prep for.
On the income side of things, half the articles I've found when I look up any job role, just kind of doing research on them, there's always blurbs about what the job is, but then it seems like the other half of the articles are income based. How much does this person make, or what can you expect? Depending on when it was dated, it's hard to narrow things down because of the dates, because of location, cost of living,
Yeah.
things like that. But is there anything about the income, and if you did bring that up as a approach that as a subject related to your job role, is there any thoughts or feedback you have on that related to your job?
The income is going to be mostly based on your experience level. Like right out of college, if you sign on with an actual oil and gas company, not like a subcontracting company, you can probably expect 90 to 110 ish, maybe out of college. And I'd advise anybody to try to start in an operational geology role. That's kind of the best role that I've found to get the foundation you need to move on to the other roles. You kind of get at least a superficial understanding of what the other roles are doing in the operational role. And then as time goes on, it usually grows pretty quick. So as a senior geologist, you probably expect to make around 140 to 190 maybe a year. And then that's salary. Bonuses can depend on the company as well. If you're with a larger company, they usually tend to give higher bonuses. So, for example, my older company, I would get a target bonus of about 23% of my salary with stock incentives as well. So that would usually come out to a good 30, 40K extra a year in bonuses. They have very lucrative bonuses, which is why when industry is hot, you want to ride it while it's hot,
Yeah.
and then save
Yeah.
some of that up for when it's not. That's Fortunately, that's what happened before I was laid off. It's like, this doesn't look so good. I'm going to save a lot of this money, and I'm definitely glad I did because it took a couple of years to find another job. If you work for a smaller company like I work for now, if you get in early enough, a lot of times your bonuses will be smaller, but they'll reward you with equity. And if your company sells, then you'll get a cut of that proceed, which makes up for all that bonus and then some. So it very much depends on if it's a larger or smaller company.
Okay. That's good to know. That's actually pretty helpful too. The next topic I had was about your job role relative to other job roles in your field. I think you've touched on that and you've mentioned several other related job roles. So before I kind of move past that, I don't want to, is there anything else specifically you want to say about those other job roles, compared to your operational role or other geologist role in petroleum industry?
So the development geo role, honestly, is probably my favorite one. And I think a lot of that is because you had to wear so many different hats as a development geologist because you need to understand how to work with all the engineers, all of the landmen, and you learn not just pieces of your own discipline in geology, but you learn a lot of theirs as well. And I felt like I grew more in that role than any other role. And I was in that one for 4.5 years.
And I just want to confirm you like that role and you learn a lot from doing so much. How does that compare or connect with this comment earlier about a new college grad going into the operational role?
The depth of knowledge that's required in the development role is something you're not going to have right out of college.
I got you. Okay.
And
So
I
you'll get
kind of
that in the
even
operational and then you'll take that knowledge from the operational role and you can grow it, expand on it, get into the jack of all,
exactly.
maybe not jack of all trades, but okay.
Yep.
That's
You'll at
what I was
least
looking for.
be exposed to it in the operational role and then really grow it in the development role.
Are there specific schools, are there programs, are there, like kind of a golden ticket, if you go to this school or you go through this program, you're known in the industry, like you're kind of golden, or is it really spread out and universal? Lots of universities offer degree programs. Is there anything special there?
There are maybe some better known universities, but I think in general, as long as you get a college degree, and especially I would say the master's degree is the functional degree that you really need to get into oil and gas. You might get lucky with the bachelor's, but typically master's is what they're looking at now. And your pay is going to reflect that. Your pay goes up significantly if you have a master's versus a bachelor's. So Colorado School of Mines is probably the one that comes to mind for best geology programs, but there are some very strong schools in Texas. Texas A&M, University of Texas are very strong programs. Texas Tech has a pretty good petroleum program. I don't know about the geology side, but I know a lot of people in the industry that have come from Texas Tech doing engineering or landman stuff at least. And Arizona seems to have a pretty good amount as well.
Okay.
But especially anything kind of in the Mountain West region seems to have the strongest geology programs because geology is more complex out this
Yeah.
direction, I suppose.
So those are better suited, but it's not like if you can't get to those schools for whatever reason, you're just, throw your hands in there. It sounds like there's
No.
pretty much plenty of options. And so
Yeah, no, there are many people that have gone to very small private schools with geology degrees, and they're doing just
Gotcha.
fine.
And so on the job search, you mentioned the roles earlier. Maybe you could reiterate some of those roles if somebody was literally sitting there typing something in. What would some of those roles be? And are there places like Indeed.com or Monster.com that people look, or are there for the petroleum industry? There's kind of known go to this website to find more of the jobs here that you're going to find on generic websites.
Well, I sure wish there was one website for it. Make it a whole lot
Okay.
easier. No, you can. The best thing to do, honestly, is with my job search, I honestly just Googled every possible oil and gas company, and I made a spreadsheet. And if I submitted an application, I'd say, okay, I submitted an application. Like if I got an interview, I put a check. Okay, I've got an interview coming up, and I think I had probably 300 different oil and gas companies on that spreadsheet. And the best spot to find them is typically to go to their actual website. That's going to be their most accurate posting. And if they don't have one posted, especially with the smaller companies, a lot of times you just email them directly. Usually HR rep or somebody will pass that on to whoever needs to see that in the smaller company. LinkedIn does do a pretty decent job of having job postings on there. Indeed as well. You need to be aware of those though, because a lot of times they set those job postings kind of as a repeat posting, and they don't realize that they're still going. And unfortunately, you just wasted your time filling something out that has been closed for six
Submitted
months.
20
But
resumes that didn't
yeah,
matter.
that didn't go anywhere. That's a real risk, but I'm sure it's that way with any job on those sites. As far as terms to search for, it literally is operations geologist, especially for those starting out, development geologist, and sometimes there's a regional geologist posting. Sometimes development and regional geo can kind of go hand in hand there. So you just need to read the job descriptions.
And the last topic I have, I guess I would ask, is there any, there's a definitive, sounds like a definitive advantage to having a master's degree, almost a requirement, it sounds like, kind of by default now. What about a PhD? Does that get you leaps and bounds, or is it just a kind of, where does that play in the picture?
No, actually, we do have PhDs that work in the industry, but more often than not, the company is going to prefer the master's over a PhD unless you are going to be some kind of technical advisor. They kind of almost look at PhD candidates as being overqualified in a way, and sometimes I don't know how it's
Interesting.
going to sound, but
Yeah.
sometimes to be a little bit harder to work with or a little bit less malleable because if you have a PhD, you're going to consider yourself an expert, and they kind of want to teach you. The company wants to teach you their way, not you teach them your way.
Yeah, that's good to know because I think that would be an assumption that a PhD just means you're even better off than a master's. But in your career field or your job role specifically, it's you may get looked over because you have a PhD versus a master's. So something
It's
to
definitely
heavily
possible.
weigh. Yeah.
A PhD though is a huge plus if you're applying to like a state or federal geologist position, working for one of the government positions, or obviously academia is kind of a big thing. Like if you wanted to do a professorship, you have to have a PhD. Even at a lot of the smaller community colleges now, you have to have a PhD. But PhD will definitely put you on the short list for working on the government jobs.
Okay. So I guess advice would be anybody that's going to move on to a PhD really needs to know why they're doing it and not just do it thinking it's going to give them better job opportunities. They need to have a targeted kind of career goal in mind of saying this is
Right.
specifically why I'm doing the PhD.
Yeah, like if you wanted to work for the USGS, the US Geological Society, for example, a government agency, you'd probably want to tailor your PhD to be something specific that you know is going to be needed within that
Okay.
uh, organization.
And I know we're talking about all the college credentials at this point, so it might seem obvious, but I'd like to ask anyway: are there ways to get into the field without going through college? If somebody's came up through the School of Hard Knocks or worked their ways up, is it possible, or is it just don't bother trying? They're very rare.
Without college, I honestly would say it's not worth trying. I don't think it's possible. The only way, and this is going to be very very rare, is to maybe have a family connection working in a small oil and gas business that's willing to show you the ropes or something like that. The minimum you could do would be a bachelor's degree, and bachelor's is typically going to get you to generally just mud logging, which is that out on the site. job, or you're going to find yourself on the environmental side of things. And as far as salary is concerned, on the environmental side with the bachelor's, it's not much. You're probably looking between 50 to 70 if you're lucky. So it's probably a third of what you'd be making in the oil and gas industry.
Yeah, so it's definitely a very good investment to go on for the master's. Okay, that answers that. I guess the final question I'd like to end with for the next Adam Damman, who might just be starting their career path journey as a geologist in the petroleum industry, or it doesn't have to be that one in particular, but do you have any inspiring words to share with somebody who's just kind of branching out and getting into, maybe this career field?
So at the risk of getting too, I don't know, TED Talk or something.
Yeah.
I think the biggest thing to keep in mind is that you can be going against some pretty strong personalities who are scientists who are pretty sure that their way is the right way. It's going to be that way kind of in any science. So the thing that I've had to learn and that I'm continuing to learn is that you've got to trust yourself. There's a very real risk of imposter syndrome. And I know this because I've talked to many other geologists as well, especially when you get into oil and gas and you're making good money and you're going against some really bright people. You're like, man, I don't know if I'm qualified to be here. I don't know if I belong here. But I think the longer you're there, the longer you're going to learn to trust yourself, get more comfortable with your ability, and really it's about confidence. I mean, don't be overly confident. Be willing to work with other people, but it can be hard to trust your gut. And even if it just comes to even just a master's degree, you're going to defend your master's thesis. I mean, it's a scary thing too, but same thing. You just got to learn to trust yourself and that you're capable of doing it. And that's really going to be the key driver for making it through that industry, I think.
Yeah, that's a great parting piece of advice, because sometimes not everybody knows it, or they, it's good to hear those words said out loud. Some people need to hear that, oh, that's a thought you need to work on, shore up, be strong in this point. So thanks for bringing that up and highlighting that. Hopefully we'll help somebody kind of just make a move that they wouldn't have made if they hadn't heard this advice from you or something. Like, hey, I remember that guy Adam said, trust my gut. Like, I'm going to stand behind what I just said, and until somebody can convince me otherwise. And they may not have made that step without hearing those words from you. So thanks for sharing.
I actually learned that from my first boss. The first probably 3 or 4 months on the job, right out of college, figured out, hey, I'm making pretty good money. There's a lot of pressure on me to make these decisions. So I hunkered down in my office and would just work to the bone. And she actually had to come by and say, take a chill pill, get out of your office, go talk to people, build relationships. That's kind of the imposter syndrome side of things. Like, wow, like this is huge responsibility. Should I really be here? I need to make sure I can prove myself to be here. But at the same time, fostering those relationships and being a little bit more lighthearted about it is also pretty critical, or you're going to burn out real quick.
Well, thanks, Sven. I appreciate you taking time today to walk me through all this and share this insight into what you do. Hopefully somebody finds it very helpful and helps them make some decisions later on, whether it's in petroleum industry, or persuade them to do it, or helps them make a smart decision and realize it wasn't a fit for them before they went too far down the road with it. So I appreciate everything you've shared.
Definitely glad to provide some insight.
If you like what you hear and want to take the next steps in exploring your career after listening to an episode, go to jobguppy.com to see a summary and helpful links to things mentioned during the interview, like industry-specific forums or websites, example job searches, career ladders, and degree programs or trade school recommendations. The hope is you now have more information than you did before from the guest on the podcast to help you move forward with the next steps on your career exploration journey. Tune in each week as Job Guppy continues to explore a million jobs in the sea.